Welcome to the first video in the new workshop, a Stuart No. 7 model steam plant. The owner of this steam plant asked me to do some modifications to it, and the first of the modifications is to fit reversing gear to the engine. First, a bit about the steam plant. The condenser is one of the type I used to make, and the boiler is a Blackgates boiler. The boiler is fitted with a gas burner made by Mike Abbott. Mike Abbott used to have a company by the name of Max Steam. The water tank was made by a former owner of this steam plant, and the hand pump is from Blackgates Engineering. All in all, this is a very well made plant. Before I spoil it and take it all apart, I want to show you these 2-gallon cans of oil. This is not just any oil, it's Hallett steam oil. Recently, when I made a video at Bancroft Mill with Alex Carnes, I spoke to Tony Nixon and asked him, what type of oil do you use on the engine? I was mainly interested in the general lubricating oil, so he told me that they get it from Hallett's Oils. And here, on this really nice composite photograph on the side of the tin, are the contact details. At this point, I would just like to say that I bought 4 tins of this oil. I'm very impressed with the lubrication qualities of this oil, especially the compounded bearing oil. If it's good enough for the flywheel at Bancroft Mill, it's more than good enough for my application. And back to the job. I now need to remove the engine from the baseboard to fit reversing gear to it. This component, being the expansion link, the eccentric rods and the eccentrics, were not like this originally. On the request of the new owner of this plant, I mailed the original parts to the USA, and then he cleaned them up and polished them to this standard. Originally the gunmetal parts were just as cast, so he must have spent many happy hours with a needle file and some emery cloth. Originally with this steam plant was a tin, and in the tin were these parts. This part is used to move the expansion link from side to side. There are some extra bits in this tin, one being a piston gland and also this off-centre valve fork. The steel parts will make into the framework that holds the expansion link, and the part in my hand is the die block. There's also a part machine bracket which holds the entire assembly to the side of the engine. And it's definitely part machined, it needs opening up a little bit and it needs a hole through the centre. I did have a drawing for the dimensions and the layout of this reversing gear, but it's got lost in the move. It will turn up once I've emptied all the boxes. Currently I'm living out of boxes and bin liners. The parts in my hand are 2 spare valve rods and some other kind of a rod for the engine. I'm sure I'll find out what these are for in due course. And now, without further ado, it's time to remove the engine from the baseboard. This steam plant is very well presented and it looks to be very well made. The first thing I'm removing is the displacement lubricator and of course the steam pipe from the boiler. Then I was going to remove the T-piece, but unfortunately I can't because the heads of the bolts are just too long. So I may as well just leave that where it is. This is a good feature of the engine. I actually silver soldered the piping for the original owner. If I remember rightly, I also tweaked the valve timing on the engine. The engine is held to the baseboard using 2 bolts. This is the first one being removed. This is a very long bolt. It goes a long way down into the baseboard, and it's not bolted into the wood. There's a brass fitting underneath the baseboard. I think I'll speed up the last bit of the removal process. That's better. 1 down, 1 to go. Over now to the other end, and this is an entirely different job. I have to use a spanner to remove the bolt, but I can only turn the spanner a very small amount owing to the bracket that's in the way. And now some expert viewers will be saying, well, that's stupid. Why not just loosen the bolts holding the bracket to the engine? If only I could do that. Please continue watching the video to find out why that is not possible, and I can't even get a socket in there because the bolt is too close to the bracket. This, by the way, is not all of the clip. I shortened it, I've speeded it up, and this actually took me over 20 minutes. I phoned the Samaritans, I even spoke to a man called Frank, and various other helplines. All to no avail. I was just stalling and delaying the inevitable. It's just a long, fiddly job. But at least I was warm in the new workshop. And for me it's a great place to be, surrounded by things that I really like. The bolt is very long and it's a bit looser now, so I'm using a small screwdriver point to spin it round. But this wasn't very successful either, so I went back to the spanner method. And eventually, to my relief, the bolt became loose, so that's a good start. Once I could lift the engine up a little bit, I used a pair of surgical forceps underneath to rotate the bolt, and this definitely started to speed up the job. I can't believe how long this bolt is. And when I finally remove the engine, look what I see. A very nicely made brass box which collects all the oil that drips off the big end, etc., and carries it all away to a container under the baseboard. Now I need to remove the bracket so I can withdraw the bolt. When I'm first asked to give an estimate for doing a job, I have to be very careful because some jobs take a lot longer than I would first estimate. You've just seen edited highlights of just removing the engine. Now I have to first of all remove a lock nut from each of the bolts holding the bracket to the engine. To remove the lock nuts, first of all I used a small spanner, then I spun off the nuts using the point of a screwdriver like this. Here's my little red box which will contain all the parts I take off the engine so I don't lose them, so I'm adding the displacement lubricator into the mix. Now it's time to remove the second nut, once again with a spanner, and then I undo the bolt. These, by the way, are 7BA bolts, so they're quite small. But unfortunately they have been over-tightened. So it's not an easy job to remove these nuts because they've been damaged by being over-tightened. A quick synopsis of this particular job. The small bracket, which only holds the cylinder drain unions, has two bolts which go through a threaded hole in the casting, followed by a washer at the other side on each of them, and two lock nuts. This is absolute madness. I'm going to refit the bracket using the two bolts on the right hand side of this image. I like to keep things simple, pretty much like some of the girlfriends that I've had, and two very short 7BA bolts hold this bracket just fine to the side of the engine. And that's it for this first episode. I've had enough. I'm going to go back to unpacking all my stuff in the house. It seems like a never-ending job. Thanks for watching this first video in the new workshop, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website. Click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you will find it very easy to find other videos that you may like to watch.